Sweet potato vodka, day 5.
Come all you moonshiners if you want to hear.
Now that we've got all of that out of the way, of course, this is George and Barley and Hops, the channel that dares to unlock the mysteries of home distilling. And of course, to share and be as transparent as possible with as much information as we can harness. That's the beauty of this community, and that's the purpose of the channel in itself. So please, if you do get an opportunity, subscribe, share us with your friends, like the video, comment below, do all those great things. So thank you. Now, we're on day 5. Now, day 5 is the period that I chose because there are some remarkable differences from the very beginning. You know, we always have that challenge of airlocks. And people misunderstanding and confusing that the airlock is the measuring device. It's not. It's not. Oh, you heard that? Yeah. It's an indicator. It's only an indicator. Now, like I said, I've got 3 buckets here. I know one that's sealed really well because it's still fermenting slowly. It is really slowed down dramatically. The one in the center is still having some challenges, and this one on the end, rarely, it doesn't bubble. Sorry, it just doesn't bubble. And I know that. And I know that I have a leak around my lid. I've got one of those old lids that I've used for years, and I'm going to have to replace it. But I'm comfortable. I'm comfortable with that because keep this in mind, okay? CO2 is produced by your yeast. It's one of the byproducts, okay? So right now I have a layer of CO2 on top of that mash. And that CO2 is heavier than air. Yes, CO2 is heavier than air, and it sinks. So I have a blanket of CO2 that's still protecting my mash. So then I guess the question is, well, George, then why do you use an airlock in the first place? An airlock is for that indicator and also keeps other stuff out from going in. Now, having that layer of CO2, unless I remove the lid and allow air to blow across it and displace all that CO2, that mash will always be protected by that layer. It kind of makes sense now? I mean, can you follow that? That it's really, believe it or not, it is elementary on some levels, but sometimes it's hard to understand that being heavier than air, it just sits there unless you displace it by a draft blowing it away. That's why we put lids on our buckets. That's why we use airlocks. Other than that, our airlock is really a good distant indicator. It's kind of neat. And, of course, the more it bubbles, the more it's fermenting. Well, there is a little bit of correlation there. But it sure does look kind of neat, doesn't it? Now, we're going to open this up and I'm going to show you what it looks like now. Because I did ask a question on one of those videos and we're going to start to answer that question. But before we get there, I was watching some videos today and I looked on one of my friends. Now, there's myself, there's Stillet, and then there's Bearded and Bored. I like to call us the 3 amigos. Now, Bearded and Bored has published a video that I think you really need to see because the guy does a great job. And of course, after you subscribe here, subscribe to his channel if you want some updates too, because he's really putting out some good information. Now, this one is on an apple brandy. But what's really, really neat about it is he also includes an apple pie moonshine recipe that is really simple and straightforward. And I think you'll enjoy that. So I'm going to add, there he is, he's over there. Yeah, I'm going to put his logo here. And I'm going to put a link to that video in the description of this video so that you can just go to that. I think you really enjoy that. So, next is, we're going to look at this, and I'm going to bring the camera close and give you a close-up view of the mash, and we're going to open up this bucket. And then what am I going to do? I'm going to also use the hydrometer. The hydrometer is the only way to tell officially if you're fermenting or not. Remember, it hasn't bubbled, so, you're clueless. George, it's not fermenting. I'll always say, use your hydrometer. That will tell you. What am I looking for? If it floats here at first, anywhere, makes no difference. And after a few days, if it floats here, it's been fermenting. I don't care whether it's produced a bubble or not. It's been fermenting. So we're going to prove that to you. All right, let's get a look in here. And this bucket's pretty easy to take off. This lid's pretty easy to take off because it doesn't seal that well. Whoa! And now you'll notice, you see these bubbles? This is some CO2 that is still escaping, so I know that it's fermenting. But now look at specifically the difference in the crust on the top of this as opposed to the crust that we had several days ago. You see how thin it is? So now we're starting to answer that. Remember what the question was? Well, the question all revolved around the thickness and the fullness of that crust. And I asked, what do you think is going to happen as we get closer to the end of fermentation? That is going to start to settle to the bottom of my fermenter. Now, if I want to verify, I already know it has, but I want to validate whether it's been fermenting or not, I just drop my hydrometer in there and see where it floats. And right now I'm floating at 1.0, probably about 1.010, somewhere in that neighborhood. Now, is that an accurate reading? No, I've got CO2 in there, I've got some other solid particulates, but it's an indicator. It does give me a reading, as opposed to the 1.065, 6.3, and 6.0 respectively in these buckets that I started with. So I know that my gravity has gone down dramatically. So I know, and I can also smell it. Yes, sweet potato vodka mash. And I'll give this a stir. And then here, most shortly, I will clean that bucket lid and stick it back on there. Well, that kind of gives you the update on our sweet potato mash for our sweet potato vodka. Now, what is the next step? Well, I'm just going to allow that to finish out fermenting. And how long will that take? God, who knows? Probably, I'm going to guess and say probably another day or two. And see, that's why we always say it's like a 7 to 10 day window for fermentation. There are mashes that will ferment in 3 days. Keep this in mind, okay? A lot has to do with the availability or the level of fermentable sugars that you have in your mash. I'll give you an example. In this particular case, on average, I've got about 1.06, between 6.0 and 6.5. Okay, that's my specific gravity. And that will take anywhere from 7 to 10 days. If I had a higher gravity, like 1.090, it's like sitting down at the dinner table and someone puts down 3 sliders, them small hamburgers. Doesn't take you long to eat those. But if they put down 12 of those, it's going to take you a little longer. It's going to take you longer to eat those than it is that first plate of just 3 of them. You follow me? So if you have a really low gravity, yes, your yeast are going to develop that colony. They're going to migrate and populate, and then they are going to eat away, and they're going to eat all that sugar pretty rapidly. If you've got a lot of leftover fermentable sugars, and of course there's enough water and your environment is correct, then it's going to take them a little bit longer because they just got that much more to eat. So you follow that train of thought. It's, time for fermentation to start and finish is most directly connected to the amount of fermentable sugars, the environment itself, to include temperature. And I've maintained 77 degrees out here in the shop for the past 5 days for that purpose, for that reason. I find that about 77 degrees in this particular case worked out extremely well. So that's my tip for today, and make sure you use the hydrometer, because the hydrometer is your tool to this hobby. This is just a regular beer and wine hydrometer, and it measures the specific gravity. You can either use the specific gravity, the brick scale, you can use the balling scale, you can use the percentage. It doesn't matter. They're all the same thing. They're just different names and different scales, but at least find one and stick with it. But this is your tool to set you free. Until, of course, you get to the distilling process, and then, of course, you trade this in for the proof and trail hydrometer, which measures the proof of a distilled spirit. And see, that's how easy that gets. Now, last but not least, I had someone write in and had a challenge, and you may have had this similar challenge, and that is the odor inside your fermenters. If you're using plastic buckets or you're using a conical fermenter, if you're using one by mini brew or you're using a fast fermenter or whatever the case may be, you may find that over a period of time, and depending on what the constituents of whatever you're making is, that it may leave a residual odor inside that, and no matter how hard you clean it, it just doesn't want to come clean. Meaning it cleans out and it's nice and squeaky clean, but it's still got that pungent odor that you just can't seem to get rid of. Well, a surefire method to get rid of it, use that 551 cleaning solution. Yeah, 500 milliliters of water, 50 milliliters of hydrogen peroxide, and 1 ounce by weight of citric acid. Mix that up, pour that in your bucket, and then put the lid on, and of course roll it around every couple of minutes so that it soaks around the inside of the bucket. Let it set up and let it soak for a few minutes, and then rinse it out. Use some Dawn dish soap, wash it out real quick, and you'd be surprised how clean and odor-free that fermenter becomes. That will work in your fast ferment, it'll work in your mini brew, it'll work in just about any fermenter you have, and of course what it will do is it will prevent you from trying to go, I guess I need to use a scrub pad. Because remember, we don't want to use scrub pads inside these. When you do, you scratch the plastic, and that's just a great hiding place for microorganisms. So please stay away from the scrub pads. Use 551. It's a simple mixture. Cost you pennies. Until next time. Yep. As always, please subscribe, share us with your friends, like the video, comment below. Happy distilling.